Behind the palace walls and carefully orchestrated public appearances lies a love story that nearly never happened. While the world watched William and Catherine's fairy tale wedding in 2011, few knew about the secret phone calls at 2 a.m., the heartbreaking breakup that lasted 77 days, or the moment when William almost walked away from the throne for love. This isn't the sanitized version you've seen in magazines. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about two young people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, fought against palace protocol, and changed the very foundation of the British monarchy forever. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the future King and Queen of England. Their story began not with a royal decree, but with a clumsy collision in a university hallway that would echo through history. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone paths of St. Andrews University as Catherine Middleton hurried toward her art history lecture, her arms full of books and her mind racing with thoughts about the essay she had submitted the day before. She had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday in September 2001 would mark the beginning of a love story that would captivate the world. Meanwhile, in a dormitory room just 3 buildings away, Prince William stared at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting the collar of his simple blue sweater. The weight of his destiny pressed down on his shoulders like an invisible crown. At 19, he was already being groomed for a life of public service, royal duties, and carefully orchestrated relationships. His protection officers waited outside, a constant reminder that his life would never be truly his own. The collision happened at exactly 10:47 a.m. in the corridor outside the Mackintosh Gallery. Catherine, rushing to make it to her lecture on time, rounded the corner just as William emerged from a side hallway. The impact sent her books flying in every direction, papers scattering across the polished floor like fallen leaves. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," William said, immediately dropping to his knees to help gather the scattered materials. His baseball cap had fallen off in the collision, revealing the sandy blonde hair that had graced countless magazine covers. Catherine looked up from where she was collecting her notes, and their eyes met for the first time. There was something in that moment, something neither of them could quite explain later when they tried to recall it. It wasn't love at first sight, as the fairy tale versions would later claim. It was something quieter, more profound. Recognition, perhaps, as if two souls that had been searching finally found what they were looking for. "It's fine, really," Catherine said, accepting the books he handed back to her. Her cheeks were flushed, not from embarrassment about the collision, but from the strange flutter in her chest when he smiled at her. "You're in Professor Hartley's class, aren't you?" William asked, noticing the art history textbook in her stack. "Yes, and I'm about to be very late," she replied, glancing at her watch. "Mind if I walk with you? I'm heading there too." As they walked together down the corridor, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. William found himself charmed by Catherine's natural manner. She didn't seem to recognize him, or if she did, she was remarkably good at pretending otherwise. For the first time in years, he felt like he could just be himself, not the Prince of Wales, not the future king, just William. Catherine, for her part, was struck by how normal he seemed. Yes, there was something familiar about his face, but she attributed it to having seen him around campus. She noticed the way he carried himself, with confidence, but without arrogance, and how he listened when she spoke about her passion for art history with genuine interest. Their first weeks at St. Andrews passed in a blur of lectures, study groups, and casual encounters in the dining hall. William had chosen the university partly because it offered him a chance at normalcy, a place where he could blend in with other students. The arrangement with the press meant that photographers would leave him alone during his university years, giving him a precious window of privacy that he was determined not to waste. Catherine quickly became part of a close-knit group of friends that included William. She was studying art history with a focus on Italian Renaissance painting, while William had initially enrolled in art history as well before switching to geography. Their shared interest in art gave them countless opportunities to spend time together, whether studying in the library or attending gallery exhibitions. The friends who surrounded them during those early days would later recall that there was an immediate chemistry between William and Catherine, though neither seemed to acknowledge it openly. They would sit next to each other during lectures, share textbooks when one of them forgot theirs, and engage in animated discussions about their coursework that often continued long after their other friends had grown bored and moved on to other topics. One evening in October, the group decided to attend a charity fashion show being held in the university's events hall. Catherine had volunteered to participate as one of the models, something she had mentioned casually to William a few days earlier. What she hadn't expected was the impact her appearance would have on him. As Catherine walked down the makeshift runway in a sheer black dress over a bandeau and shorts, something shifted in William's perception of her. Until that moment, he had seen her as a friend, someone whose company he enjoyed and whose intelligence he respected. But watching her move with such confidence and grace, he suddenly saw her as a woman, and the realization hit him like a physical force. "Wow," he whispered to his roommate, who was sitting beside him in the audience. "I know, right?" his friend replied, but William wasn't really listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on Catherine, and for the first time, he began to consider the possibility that his feelings for her might be more than friendship. After the show, William approached Catherine backstage, where she was changing back in her regular clothes. "You were amazing out there," he said, and something in his voice made her look up at him more carefully. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly aware of a new tension between them. That night marked the beginning of a subtle shift in their relationship. Their conversations became more personal, their study sessions more frequent, and their friends began to notice the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. But William was also grappling with the implications of his growing feelings. He had been raised to understand that his personal relationships would always be subject to public scrutiny, and that any woman he became seriously involved with would have her life completely transformed. The weight of that responsibility was something he carried with him constantly. During a late-night conversation in November, as they walked along the beach near the university, William opened up to Catherine about the pressures he faced as a member of the royal family. He spoke about the constant media attention, the expectations placed on him, and the isolation he often felt despite being surrounded by people. Catherine listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that surprised him with their maturity. She didn't try to minimize his experiences or offer easy solutions. Instead, she simply accepted his reality and tried to understand it. "It must be incredibly lonely," she said as they stopped to look out at the dark ocean. "It is," William admitted, "but less so lately." He didn't elaborate, but Catherine understood what he was saying. She felt the same way. In the months since they had met, she had found herself thinking about him constantly, looking forward to their conversations, and feeling more like herself when she was with him than she had ever felt before. As winter approached, and their first semester at St. Andrews drew to a close, both William and Catherine were forced to confront the reality of their growing feelings for each other. They had crossed the line from friendship into something deeper, but neither was quite ready to acknowledge it openly. The Christmas break loomed ahead of them, promising several weeks apart. William would return to the royal residences for official duties and family obligations, while Catherine would go home to her family in Bucklebury. The prospect of separation felt more difficult than either had expected. Their last evening together before the break was spent in the university library, ostensibly studying for their final exams, but actually just talking quietly about everything and nothing. As the library prepared to close, they gathered their books and walked slowly back toward their respective dormitories. "I'll miss you," William said as they reached the point where their paths diverged. "I'll miss you too," Catherine replied. And for a moment, they stood there looking at each other, both sensing that they were on the verge of something that would change everything. But instead of taking that final step, they simply said good night and went their separate ways. Both spent the walk back to their rooms wondering if they had missed their chance, and both fell asleep thinking about what might happen when they returned to St. Andrews in the new year. The Christmas break passed slowly for both of them. William threw himself into his royal duties, attending state functions and fulfilling obligations that had been arranged months in advance. But in quiet moments, his thoughts kept returning to Catherine, to their conversations, and to the way she had looked at him during that last evening in the library. Catherine, meanwhile, found herself struggling to concentrate on anything. She helped her mother with Christmas preparations, caught up with old friend from home, and tried to enjoy her time with family. But a part of her remained at St. Andrew's, thinking about William and wondering what would happen when they saw each other again. Neither of them spoke during the break, though both thought about calling or sending a message countless times. They were both careful not to cross certain boundaries, even in their own minds. The implications of their relationship were too significant, too complicated, to rush into anything without careful consideration. When January arrived and students began returning to St. Andrews for the spring semester, both William and Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had spent weeks thinking about each other, but they had no way of knowing if the feelings they had experienced were mutual or if the magic they had felt was simply a product of their imagination. Their reunion was awkward at first. They saw each other across the dining hall on the first day back and exchanged tentative smiles. Later, when they encountered each other outside the library, their conversation was stilted and formal, as if they were strangers again. But gradually, over the course of the first week back, they fell into their old patterns. Study sessions resumed. Conversations flowed more naturally, and the connection they had felt before Christmas began to reassert itself. It was during one of these study sessions, held in Catherine's dormitory room, because the library was too crowded, that something finally shifted. They had been working on separate assignments for hours, sitting on opposite sides of her small desk, when William looked up and found Catherine watching him. "What?" he asked, smiling at the expression on her face. "Nothing," she said, but she didn't look away. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and in that silence, all the careful boundaries they had maintained began to dissolve. William reached across the desk and took Catherine's hand in his, and this time, neither of them pulled away. "Catherine," he said quietly, and she could hear the question in his voice. "Yes," she replied, though he hadn't actually asked anything. But they both understood what had just been decided. After months of careful friendship and growing attraction, they had finally acknowledged what had been building between them. Their relationship was about to enter entirely new territory, with implications neither of them could fully comprehend. The weeks that followed their quiet acknowledgement in Catherine's dormitory room were filled with a careful dance of discovery. William and Catherine began spending more time alone together, but always under the guise of academic collaboration or casual friendship. They were acutely aware that any hint of romance would bring unwanted attention and complicate their lives in ways they weren't ready to handle. Their first real date, though neither called it that, happened on a February evening when William suggested they attend a lecture about Italian Renaissance art being given by a visiting professor from Florence. Catherine had mentioned her particular interest in the period, and William saw it as the perfect opportunity to spend time with her while maintaining the pretense of academic pursuit. They sat in the back row of the lecture hall, sharing whispered observations about the slides and artwork being discussed. When the professor displayed a reproduction of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, William leaned over and whispered, "It reminds me of you." Catherine turned to look at him, surprised by the romantic nature of the comment. "Because I emerged from the sea," she whispered back, trying to lighten the mood. "Because it's beautiful," William replied, and there was something in his eyes that made Catherine's breath catch. After the lecture, they walked slowly back across campus, taking the longest possible route to extend their time together. The conversation had shifted from academic topics to more personal territory. Catherine told William about her childhood in Bucklebury, about her parents' business, and about her dreams for the future. William, in turn, shared stories about his own childhood, carefully edited versions that didn't include the more traumatic aspects of growing up in the public eye. What do you want to do after university? Catherine asked as they paused outside the library, neither quite ready to end the evening. William was quiet for a long moment. I know what I'm supposed to do, he said finally. But what I want to do is something I'm still figuring out. Catherine understood the weight of that statement. By now, she had realized exactly who William was, though they had never explicitly discussed his royal status. She had recognized him weeks earlier, but had chosen not to mention it, treating him instead as just another student. That decision had allowed their relationship to develop naturally, without the complications that his title would inevitably bring. As they spent more time together, their friends began to notice the change in their dynamic. What had once been a casual friendship had evolved into something deeper and more exclusive. They started sitting together consistently during meals, choosing to study together rather than with their larger group, and finding excuses to spend time alone. The turning point came in March, during a weekend trip that their group had organized to visit Edinburgh. They had booked several rooms in a small hotel near the Royal Mile, and through a combination of circumstance and subtle maneuvering, William and Catherine ended up sharing adjoining rooms with a connecting door. On their first evening in Edinburgh, after a day of sightseeing with their friends, William knocked on the connecting door between their rooms. Catherine opened it to find him holding 2 cups of tea he had made with a small kettle in his room. "Thought you might want some tea," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thank you," she replied, stepping aside to let him into her room. They settled on a small couch by the window, looking out at the lights of the city below. The conversation that night was different from their previous talks. The usual careful boundaries they maintained seemed to dissolve in the intimate setting, away from the familiar environment of St. Andrews and the watchful eyes of their fellow students. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said, setting down her teacup and turning to face William directly. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Being who you are, I mean. Do you ever wish you could just be ordinary?" William considered the question carefully. "Every day," he said finally, "but lately I've been thinking that maybe ordinary is overrated." "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe what matters isn't whether your life is ordinary or extraordinary. Maybe what matters is who you share it with." They looked at each other across the small space between them on the couch, and Catherine felt her heart begin to race. William reached out and gently touched her face, tracing the line of her cheek with his thumb. "Catherine," he said softly, and this time there was no mistaking the question in his voice. Instead of answering with words, Catherine leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, both of them aware that they were crossing a line from which there would be no return. But as William responded to her kiss, drawing her closer to him, all their careful restraint fell away. When they finally broke apart, they remained close together, Catherine's forehead resting against William's, both of them breathing hard. "Are we really doing this?" Catherine whispered. "I hope so," William replied, and kissed her again. That night marked the official beginning of their romantic relationship, though they agreed to keep it private for as long as possible. They were both aware of the complications that would arise once news of their relationship became public, and they wanted to protect what they had for as long as they could. Returning to St. Andrews after the Edinburgh trip, William and Catherine found it increasingly difficult to hide their feelings for each other. They tried to maintain their usual behavior around their friends, but their connection was becoming impossible to disguise. They would catch each other's eyes across a crowded room and share secret smiles, find excuses to touch hands when passing books or papers, and linger after group study sessions until they were alone. Their friends, however, were not oblivious to what was happening. During a gathering in someone's dormitory room a few weeks after Edinburgh, one of their closest friends finally confronted them directly. "You two are together, aren't you?" she said, looking back and forth between William and Catherine. William and Catherine exchanged glances, silently debating whether to continue their charade or acknowledge the truth. "Is it that obvious?" Catherine asked finally. "Only to those of us who know you both well," their friend replied with a grin. "But don't worry, your secret is safe with us." The relief of no longer having to hide their relationship from their close friends was immense. While they still maintained discretion around other students and university staff, being able to be themselves with their inner circle made everything easier. As spring progressed, William and Catherine's relationship deepened significantly. They began spending entire weekends together, taking long walks along the coast, exploring nearby towns, and simply enjoying each other's company. William introduced Catherine to some of his favorite spots around St. Andrews, places where he had found solace during his more difficult moments at university. One particularly memorable afternoon in April, William took Catherine to a secluded beach about an hour's drive from campus. They had packed a picnic lunch and spent the day talking, reading, and simply being together without any external pressures or distractions. "This is perfect," Catherine said as they sat on a blanket, watching the waves roll in. "It is," William agreed, but he was looking at her rather than the ocean. During these quiet moments together, they began discussing more serious topics. Catherine learned about the pressures William felt regarding his future role, the weight of public expectation, and the sacrifices he would eventually have to make. William, in turn, came to understand Catherine's hopes for her own future and her concerns about how their relationship might impact her ability to pursue her goals. "I want you to know that I understand what being with me would mean," William said during one of their beach conversations. "I know it would change everything for you." "I know," Catherine replied, "but some things are worth the change." Their physical relationship progressed naturally during this period as well. They were young and in love, and the attraction between them was undeniable. But they were also both aware of the additional complications that intimacy would bring to their situation, and they approached this aspect of their relationship with the same careful consideration they applied to everything else. As their second year at St. Andrews drew to a close, William and Catherine faced their first major challenge as a couple. William would be spending the summer fulfilling royal obligations and participating in military training exercises, while Catherine had planned to take an art history course in Florence and then work with her parents' business. The prospect of separation was difficult for both of them, but it also forced them to confront the reality of their relationship. Were they simply enjoying a university romance that would naturally fade when faced with real-world pressures, or had they found something worth fighting for? "What happens now?" Catherine asked during one of their last evenings together before the summer break. "I don't know," William admitted, "but I know I don't want this to end." "Neither do I." They made promises to stay in touch, to call each other regularly, and to write letters when phone calls weren't possible. But both were aware that the summer would be a test of their relationship in ways they hadn't yet experienced. William's summer was filled with official duties that required his full attention and presence. He attended state functions, participated in charity events, and began the military training that would eventually lead to his service in the armed forces. Every moment of his day was scheduled and supervised, leaving little time for private conversations or personal reflection. Catherine's summer in Florence was transformative in different ways. Immersed in the art and culture she had studied for 2 years, she found herself growing and changing in ways she hadn't expected. The independence of living abroad, the challenge of navigating a foreign culture, and the inspiration of being surrounded by some of the world's greatest artistic treasures all contributed to her development as a young woman. Despite their busy schedules, William and Catherine managed to maintain contact throughout the summer. Their phone calls were necessarily brief and carefully scheduled, but they wrote long letters to each other that revealed depths of feeling and commitment neither had fully expressed before. In one particularly meaningful letter, William wrote about his growing certainty that Catherine was the person he wanted to share his life with, despite all the complications that such a choice would entail. Catherine's response was equally heartfelt, expressing her willingness to face whatever challenges their relationship might bring. By the time they prepared to return to St. Andrews for their third year, both William and Catherine had gained clarity about their feelings and their future. The summer apart had not weakened their bond, but had instead strengthened their commitment to each other and their determination to make their relationship work despite the obstacles they would inevitably face. Their reunion at the beginning of the new academic year was emotional and joyful. They had both changed during their time apart, but their connection remained as strong as ever. If anything, the summer had proven to them both that what they shared was real and lasting, capable of surviving separation and external pressures. As they settled into their third year at St. Andrews, William and Catherine began making plans that extended beyond university. They talked about where they might live after graduation, how they would handle the increasing media attention that would inevitably come with a more public relationship, and what steps they would need to take to introduce Catherine to William's family. The conversation about meeting his family was particularly significant. William had been protecting Catherine from that level of exposure to his royal life, knowing that meeting his father and grandmother would represent a major escalation in their relationship. But as their commitment to each other deepened, such meetings became inevitable. "Are you ready for that?" William asked one evening as they discussed the possibility of Catherine joining him for a weekend at one of the royal residences. "Are you ready for me to meet them?" Catherine replied. "I think so," William said. "But once they meet you, everything changes. There'll be no going back to the way things are now." Catherine understood what he was saying. Meeting his family would mean acknowledging their relationship officially, at least within royal circles. It would also mean submitting to a level of scrutiny and evaluation that she had so far been spared. "I'm ready," she said finally. "Are you?" William looked at the woman who had become the center of his world, the person who had shown him what it meant to be loved for who he was rather than what he represented. Despite all the complications and challenges that lay ahead, he had never been more certain of anything in his life. "Yes," he said, "I'm ready." The invitation came in November, delivered by one of William's protection officers in a sealed envelope that bore no external indication of its royal origins. Catherine held the cream-colored paper with trembling hands as she read the formal request for her to join Prince William for a weekend at Highgrove House, Prince Charles's private residence in Gloucestershire. "This is it," William said, watching her face carefully as she absorbed the implications of the invitation. "Once you walk through those doors, there's no pretending anymore that we're just university students having a casual relationship." Catherine set the invitation down on her desk and turned to face him. They were in her dormitory room, surrounded by the familiar chaos of textbooks, art history prints, and the remnants of their afternoon study session. In less than a week, she would be stepping into a world that she had only seen in magazines and television documentaries. "Tell me what I need to know," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Over the next few days, William briefed Catherine on royal protocol, family dynamics, and the subtle social codes that govern life within his world. He explained how to address his father, when a curtsy to his grandmother, and the unspoken expectations that would surround every conversation and interaction. "The most important thing to remember," William said during one of their preparation sessions, "is to be yourself. They need to see who you really are, not some version of yourself that you think they want to meet." But Catherine was struggling with exactly that question. Who was she, really, when stripped of the comfortable anonymity she had enjoyed at St. Andrews? For nearly 3 years, she had been able to exist in William's world as simply Kate, the art history student from Bucklebury. Now she was about to be evaluated as Catherine Middleton, potential future princess. The journey to Highgrove took place on a Friday afternoon in late November. Catherine traveled separately from William, driven by one of his protection officers in an unmarked car. As they approached the estate, she felt her nervousness intensify. Through the car window, she could see photographers with long telephoto lenses positioned outside the gates, their presence a stark reminder of the public interest in William's private life. "Don't worry about them," the protection officer said, noticing her attention to the photographers. "They can't see through the tinted windows, and they're not allowed on the property." The car passed through the gates and up a winding drive lined with ancient trees. Highgrove House came into view gradually, a beautiful honey-colored stone building that managed to be both grand and welcoming. Catherine could see why William spoke of it as his father's sanctuary, a place where Prince Charles could pursue his passions for architecture, gardening, and organic farming away from the formal constraints of his official residences. William was waiting for her at the front entrance, and the sight of his familiar face helped calm her nerves. He had arrived earlier in the day and was dressed more formally than she was accustomed to seeing him, in a dark suit and tie that reminded her of the vast difference between their usual student life and the world she was about to enter. "How are you feeling?" he asked, taking her hands in his as they stood in the entrance hall. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "Good," William said with a smile. "If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried that you didn't understand what we're doing here." Prince Charles appeared in the doorway of what Catherine would later learn was the morning room, and she got her first close look at the man who might one day be her father-in-law. He was taller than she had expected, with kind eyes and an easy manner that immediately put her at ease. "You must be Catherine," he said, extending his hand to her. "William has told me a great deal about you." The formal curtsy that William had taught her felt awkward and uncertain, but Prince Charles simply smiled and gestured for her to rise. "None of that is necessary here," he said. "We're quite informal at Highgrove." The weekend that followed was unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. She was given her own guest room in the main house, beautifully appointed with antique furniture and original artwork. Meals were served in an intimate dining room that overlooked the estate's famous gardens, and conversations ranged from current events to art history to organic farming techniques. Prince Charles proved to be an engaging host, genuinely interested in Catherine's studies and her thoughts on various topics. He showed her around his beloved gardens, explaining his philosophy of sustainable agriculture and his various environmental initiatives. Catherine found herself relaxing in his presence, discovering that beneath the formal exterior was a man of genuine warmth and intellectual curiosity. "My son tells me you're particularly interested in Italian Renaissance art," Prince Charles said as they walked through his greenhouse, where he grew organic vegetables year-round. "Yes, sir," Catherine replied. "I'm hoping to write my senior thesis on the influence of Platonic philosophy on Botticelli's mythological paintings." "Fascinating," Prince Charles said, and Catherine could tell from his tone that his interest was genuine. "You must see the Botticelli drawings we have at Windsor. I'll arrange for you to have a private viewing if you'd like." These small gestures of acceptance and inclusion meant more to Catherine than any formal declaration of approval. She was being treated not as a curiosity or an outsider, but as someone who belonged in their world. The real test, however, came on Saturday evening, when Queen Elizabeth II arrived unexpectedly for dinner. William had warned Catherine that his grandmother might make an appearance during the weekend, but the reality of meeting the monarch was overwhelming. Catherine was in her room, changing for dinner, when William knocked on her door with an urgent expression on his face. "Granny's here," he said simply, and Catherine felt her stomach drop. "Now? Tonight? She wanted to meet you," William said. "This is actually a good thing. It means she's taking our relationship seriously." Catherine took a deep breath and smoothed her dress, a simple black cocktail dress that she had chosen specifically for its appropriateness and elegance. She had practiced her curtsy dozens of times, but now, faced with the prospect of actually performing it for the Queen, she felt her confidence wavering. "Just remember," William said, taking her hands in his, "she's my grandmother. She wants me to be happy, and you make me happy." The introduction took place in the drawing room before dinner. Queen Elizabeth II was smaller than Catherine had expected, but her presence filled the room. She was elegantly dressed in a navy blue dress with pearls, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her eyes sharp and assessing. Catherine's curtsy was deeper and more formal than the one she had given Prince Charles, and she held it until the Queen gestured for her to rise. When she looked up, she found herself looking into eyes that were surprisingly warm. "Miss Middleton," the Queen said, her voice carrying the crisp diction that Catherine had heard in countless Christmas broadcasts. "How lovely to finally meet you." Dinner that evening was both the most intimidating and most educational experience of Catherine's life. She found herself seated between William and Prince Charles, directly across from the Queen, engaged in conversation that ranged from university life to current political developments to the challenges facing the monarchy in the modern era. The Queen asked thoughtful questions about Catherine's family, her studies, and her plans for the future. There was no overt interrogation, but Catherine was aware that every response was being carefully evaluated. She spoke honestly about her background, her parents' business success, and her own academic interests. "William tells me you're quite accomplished at photography," the Queen said during the main course. "I enjoy it, ma'am," Catherine replied. "I find it helps me see art history in a different way, understanding how light and composition work together. Perhaps you might take some photographs during your stay," the Queen suggested. "I'd be interested to see Highgrove through your eyes." After dinner, the family gathered in the sitting room for coffee and conversation. Catherine found herself relaxing as the evening progressed, drawn into discussions about books, art, and world events. She began to see these people not as untouchable royals, but as a family that was genuinely interested in getting to know her. When the Queen prepared to leave later that evening, she approached Catherine privately while William and his father were discussing something in the garden room. "Miss Middleton," she said, and Catherine immediately stood and curtsied again. "Mom, I want you to know that I can see why my grandson cares for you so deeply," the Queen said. "You have a natural grace and intelligence that will serve you well, whatever the future may hold." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness in the Queen's words. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more to me than I can express." "The life William is destined to lead is not an easy one," the Queen continued. "It requires sacrifices and compromises that most people never have to consider. But it's also a life of great purpose and meaning. If you choose to be part of it, you'll have my full support." That conversation stayed with Catherine long after the Queen's departure. She lay awake that night in her guest room, thinking about what she had experienced over the weekend and what it meant for her future with William. The next morning, as she prepared to return to St. Andrews, Prince Charles sought her out for a private conversation. They walked through his gardens in the crisp morning air, their breath visible in the cold. "I hope this weekend hasn't been too overwhelming," he said. "Not overwhelming," Catherine replied. "Eye-opening, perhaps. William is going to face significant challenges in the years ahead," Prince Charles said, stopping beside a fountain that was surrounded by dormant rose bushes. "The role he's destined to fill requires enormous personal sacrifice, but it also requires the support of someone who understands both the burdens and the privileges that come with service to the country." Catherine understood that this was more than casual conversation. Prince Charles was assessing her commitment and her understanding of what a future with William would entail. "I understand that, sir," she said, "and I want you to know that I don't take any of this lightly." "I believe you don't," Prince Charles replied, "and I believe you have the strength of character to handle whatever challenges may come." The drive back to St. Andrews gave Catherine time to process everything she had experienced. The weekend had been a success by any measure she could think of. She had been accepted, welcomed, and treated as a member of the family rather than as an outsider under evaluation. But it had also driven home the reality of what a future with William would mean. The weight of expectation, the loss of privacy, the constant scrutiny, and the responsibility that would come with being associated with the monarchy were all more real and immediate after her time at Highgrove. William was waiting for her when she returned to her dormitory, anxious to hear her impressions of the weekend and her family's response to her. "How was it?" he asked as soon as she walked through her door. "It was wonderful," Catherine said, and she could see the relief in his eyes. "Your family is lovely, William. Really lovely." And Catherine sat down on her bed and looked at the man she loved, the man whose future was both inspiring and daunting. "And I think I'm beginning to understand what we're really talking about when we talk about being together." William sat beside her and took her hands. "Are you having second thoughts?" Catherine considered the question carefully. The weekend at Highgrove had shown her exactly what she would be signing up for if their relationship continued to develop. It would mean giving up any hope of a private life, accepting a level of public scrutiny that would touch every aspect of her existence, and taking on responsibilities that she had never imagined for herself. But it had also shown her a family that had welcomed her with genuine warmth, a man who loved her deeply, and a role that could be meaningful and fulfilling despite its challenges. "No," she said finally. "No second thoughts. But I think we need to start talking seriously about what comes next." William nodded, understanding that they had reached another turning point in their relationship. The weekend at Highgrove had been a test, but it had also been a commitment. They were no longer just two university students exploring a relationship. They were now two people seriously considering a future together, with all the complications and responsibilities that such a future would entail. As they sat together in Catherine's small dormitory room, surrounded by the familiar chaos of student life, both of them knew that their time of relative anonymity was drawing to a close. The next phase of their relationship would require new levels of commitment, planning, and courage from both of them. The transition from university life to the real world proved to be more challenging for William and Catherine than either had anticipated. Their graduation from St. Andrews in June 2005 marked the end of their protective bubble and the beginning of a new phase in their relationship that would test every aspect of their commitment to each other. William's path forward was clearly defined by duty and tradition. He was expected to pursue military service, begin taking on more official royal responsibilities, and gradually prepare for his future role as king. Catherine, however, faced an entirely different set of challenges. As a private citizen with no defined royal role, she found herself in the uncomfortable position of being constantly watched, but having no official platform from which to respond to the scrutiny. The media attention that had been held at bay during their university years exploded with unprecedented intensity after graduation. Photographers followed Catherine everywhere she went, camping outside her apartment, trailing her to work, and analyzing every aspect of her appearance and behavior. The tabloid press coined the term Waity Katie, a cruel nickname that suggested she was simply marking time until William proposed to her. Catherine found work as an accessories buyer for Jigsaw, a fashion chain, but even this attempt at normalcy was complicated by her relationship with William. Her employers were understanding and protective, but the constant media presence made it difficult for her to function in any normal workplace environment. Photographers would stake out the company's offices, and her colleagues found themselves being questioned about her behavior and attitude at work. "I can't live like this," Catherine confided to William during one of their increasingly infrequent meetings. They had taken refuge in a private dining room at a discreet London club, one of the few places where they could have a conversation without being photographed or overheard. "I know," William replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm trying to find a solution." But the solutions available to them were limited. William was constrained by royal protocol and his own military commitments. He had entered the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in January 2006, beginning an intensive training program that left little time for private relationships. When he was free, their meetings had to be carefully planned and often conducted in secret to avoid media attention. The strain of this period was evident to everyone close to them. Catherine's friends watched her struggle with the isolation and pressure that came with being the focus of so much unwanted attention. William, meanwhile, was dealing with his own frustrations about the limitations placed on his ability to protect the woman he loved. During a particularly difficult week in March 2007, when Catherine had been forced to change her morning routine 3 times to avoid paparazzi who had discovered her jogging route, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including William. "I'm going to take some time away," she announced during one of their phone calls. "Away from London?" William asked. "Away from everything," Catherine replied. "I need space to think, and you need to focus on your training without worrying about me." The separation that followed was supposed to be temporary, a brief hiatus that would give them both some breathing room to evaluate their relationship and their future together. But as weeks turned into months, both William and Catherine began to question whether they were strong enough to survive the pressures that would only intensify as William's public role expanded. Catherine spent most of her time away at her family's home in Bucklebury, where she could find some measure of privacy and normalcy. Her parents, who had watched her struggle with the media attention and the uncertainty of her situation, were supportive but concerned about the toll the relationship was taking on their daughter. "You don't owe anyone anything," her mother told her during one of their long conversations in the family garden. "Not the press, not the public, and not even William. You have to do what's right for you." William, meanwhile, was throwing himself into his military training with an intensity that worried his instructors and fellow officers. He was pushing himself harder than necessary, volunteering for extra duties and additional training exercises that kept him occupied, but did nothing to resolve his personal turmoil. The break in their relationship lasted 77 days, during which time both William and Catherine went through a profound period of self-examination. For William, the separation forced him to confront the reality that he could not have a normal relationship while fulfilling his royal duties. Any woman who chose to be with him would have to sacrifice her privacy, her independence, and much of her former life. For Catherine, the time apart clarified her own feelings and priorities. Without the constant pressure of media attention and royal expectations, she was able to remember who she was outside of her relationship with William. She reconnected with old friends, pursued her own interests, and gradually regained the confidence that had been eroded by months of public scrutiny. But even as they both gained clarity about themselves, they also realized how much they missed each other. The separation had proven that their relationship was more than just university romance or youthful infatuation. They genuinely loved each other and wanted to build a life together, despite all the obstacles in their path. The reconciliation began with a phone call in late June. William, who had been granted leave after completing a particularly grueling training exercise, found himself unable to concentrate on anything except his desire to see Catherine again. "I miss you," he said when she answered the phone, dispensing with any attempt at casual conversation. "I miss you too," Catherine replied, and both of them could hear the relief in her voice. "Can we try again?" William asked. "I know I can't promise that things will be easier, but I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to protect you and make this work." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, considering not just what he was saying, but what she had learned about herself during their time apart. "Yes," she said finally, "but things have to be different this time." "Ow, I need to know that this is leading somewhere," Catherine said, her voice steady but serious. "I can't live in limbo indefinitely, waiting to see what happens. If we're going to be together, we need to be working towards something concrete." William understood exactly what she was asking. After nearly 6 years together, Catherine needed some assurance that their relationship had a future, that she wasn't sacrificing her own life for something that might never materialize into a permanent commitment. "You're right," William said, "and I'm ready to start making those plans." Their reunion took place at a private party hosted by one of their mutual friends, an event where they could see each other in a social setting without the formality of an official date. The chemistry between them was immediately apparent to everyone present, but both William and Catherine were more cautious and deliberate in their approach than they had been before their separation. The renewed relationship that emerged from their time apart was more mature and more purposeful than what they had shared before. Both of them had grown during their separation, gaining a clearer understanding of what they wanted from their relationship and what they were willing to sacrifice to make it work. William began including Catherine in more of his official life, bringing her to military events and introducing her to his colleagues and superiors. This was a significant step forward, as it represented his public acknowledgement that Catherine was a permanent part of his life rather than a casual girlfriend. Catherine, meanwhile, began preparing herself more seriously for the role she might one day fill as William's wife. She studied royal history, learned about the charitable organizations associated with the monarchy, and began developing her own sense of how she might contribute to public life. One of the most significant developments during this period was Catherine's growing relationship with Prince Harry, William's younger brother. Harry had been protective of William during his difficult breakup with Catherine, but he had also been fond of her during their university days. As William and Catherine's relationship solidified, Harry became one of their strongest supporters within the royal family. "She's good for you," Harry told William during a weekend visit to Highgrove. "She keeps you grounded, keeps you human." The support of William's family was crucial during this period, as rumors about an engagement began to intensify. The media scrutiny that had been temporarily reduced during their separation returned with renewed vigor as it became clear that William and Catherine were serious about their future together. In response to the increased pressure, William made several strategic decisions designed to protect Catherine while still allowing their relationship to develop naturally. He arranged for her to receive informal security briefings, teaching her how to recognize potential threats and how to respond to aggressive media attention. He also began coordinating with his family's communications team to ensure that Catherine was not caught off guard by press inquiries or public speculation. The Christmas of 2007 marked another significant milestone in their relationship. Catherine was invited to spend the holidays with the royal family at Sandringham, the Queen's private estate in Norfolk. This was a level of inclusion that had previously been reserved for married family members, and it sent a clear signal about the seriousness of their relationship. The holiday gathering was less formal than Catherine's first meeting with the Queen at Highgrove, but it was also more significant. She was being welcomed not as a girlfriend meeting the family, but as someone who was expected to become a permanent member of their circle. Catherine found herself participating in the royal family's Christmas traditions, from a formal Christmas Eve dinner to the traditional morning walk to church on Christmas Day. She was photographed walking alongside the Queen and other family members, images that appeared on the front pages of newspapers around the world. "How did it feel?" William asked her as they walked together across the Sandringham estate on Boxing Day. "Like coming home," Catherine replied, and she was surprised to realize that she meant it. As 2008 began, both William and Catherine knew that they were approaching the moment when they would need to make a final decision about their future together. William had completed his military training and was beginning to take on more royal duties. Catherine had proven her ability to handle the pressures of royal life and had won the acceptance and affection of his family. The question was no longer whether they were right for each other, but when William would be ready to take the final step toward marriage. Catherine had made it clear that she couldn't wait indefinitely, and William was beginning to feel the pressure not just from Catherine, but from his family and the public to clarify his intentions. "I know what I want," William told her during a quiet dinner at their favorite restaurant in early February. "I want to marry you, Catherine. I want to build a life with you and start a family with you." "But," Catherine asked, sensing that there was more he needed to say. "But I need to know that you're absolutely certain this is what you want," William continued. "Because once we take that step, there's no going back. Your life will never be private again. You'll belong to the public as much as you belong to me." Catherine reached across the table and took his hands in hers. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," she said. "I love you, William. I love you enough to take on whatever comes with being your wife." William looked into her eyes and saw the same determination and courage that had first attracted him to her 6 years earlier at St. Andrews. But now it was tempered with a mature understanding of exactly what she was committing to. "Then, let's start planning a wedding," he said, and kissed her hand. The decision to move forward with marriage was one thing, but the actual proposal was something William wanted to get absolutely perfect. He spent months planning every detail, determined to create a moment that would be meaningful for both of them and honor the love they had built together over nearly a decade. William had been carrying his mother's engagement ring with him for weeks, waiting for the right moment to present it to Catherine. The 18-karat blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds had become one of the most recognizable pieces of jewelry in the world, and William knew that offering it to Catherine would be deeply symbolic, connecting her to his mother's memory while also making a statement about her place in the royal family's future. The opportunity came in October 2010 during a long-planned trip to Kenya. William had arranged for them to stay at a remote lodge in the foothills of Mount Kenya, a place where they could have privacy and where the natural beauty of the setting would provide the perfect backdrop for such an important moment. They had been in Kenya for 3 days when William decided the time was right. They were staying in a rustic but elegant lodge overlooking a vast plain where elephants and antelope grazed in the distance. The African sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the sounds of exotic birds and distant wildlife. Catherine was sitting on the veranda of their lodge, reading a book and enjoying the peaceful evening, when William approached her with obvious nervousness. "Catherine," he said, and something in his tone made her look up from her book. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the serious expression on his face. Instead of answering, William dropped to one knee beside her chair and pulled out a small velvet box. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "Catherine Elizabeth Middleton," William said, his voice steady despite the emotion he was feeling. "You have been my best friend, my greatest love, and my constant support for almost 10 years. I cannot imagine my life without you, and I don't want to try." He opened the box, revealing the stunning sapphire ring that had belonged to his mother. "Will you marry me?" Catherine was crying now, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment and the significance of what was happening. "Yes," she managed to say through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." William slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced as the African sunset painted the sky around them. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the wilderness and the privacy they had fought so hard to protect, they were just two people in love, making a commitment that would shape the rest of their lives. "It's beautiful," Catherine said, looking down at the ring that sparkled on her finger. "It was my mother's," William said. "I wanted her to be part of this moment, to be part of our beginning." Catherine understood the deep significance of that gesture. William was not just giving her a ring. He was welcoming her into his family's history and trusting her with his most precious memories of his mother. They spent the rest of their time in Kenya in a state of blissful happiness, making plans for their future while enjoying their last days of complete privacy as an engaged couple. They knew that once they returned to London and announced their engagement, their lives would change irrevocably. The official announcement came on November 16th, 2010, in the form of a statement released by Clarence House. The news sent shockwaves around the world, with media outlets in dozens of countries leading with the story of the royal engagement. Within hours, photographers and television crews had assembled outside every location associated with William and Catherine. The Middleton family home in Bucklebury was surrounded by media vans, and Catherine's parents found themselves thrust into an international spotlight they had never sought but handled with remarkable grace and dignity. The engagement interview, conducted by the BBC's Tom Bradby, took place at St. James's Palace. William and Catherine sat close together on an elegant sofa, Catherine's engagement ring clearly visible as she gestured while speaking. The interview revealed them to be a couple deeply in love, but also realistic about the challenges ahead. "Obviously, she's going to be thrown in at the deep end," William acknowledged during the interview. "But I have every confidence that she'll do a fantastic job." Catherine, meanwhile, spoke candidly about her awareness of the public scrutiny she would face. "It's nerve-wracking," she admitted, "but I think hopefully I'll take it in my stride." The months between the engagement announcement and the wedding were a whirlwind of planning, preparation, and public appearances. Catherine was assigned her own protection team and began receiving intensive training in royal protocol, public speaking, and the various charitable causes she would be expected to champion as a working member of the royal family. The wedding planning itself was an exercise in balancing personal preferences with public expectations and state protocol. Westminster Abbey was chosen as the venue, a decision that honored both tradition and the couple's desire for a setting that was both grand and spiritually meaningful. Catherine's wedding dress became one of the most closely guarded secrets in recent royal history. She worked with Sarah Burton of Alexander McQueen to design a gown that would be elegant and timeless while also being appropriate for a state occasion. The dress, with its intricate lace sleeves and long train, would later be praised as a perfect balance between modern style and classical elegance. The guest list was a diplomatic challenge, balancing family and friends with heads of state and official representatives from around the world. Catherine insisted that their university friends from St. Andrews be included, ensuring that the people who had witnessed the beginning of their love story would be present for its celebration. William chose his brother Harry as his best man, a decision that delighted both the public and the royal family. Harry's obvious affection for Catherine and his support for their relationship had been evident for years, and his role in the wedding ceremony symbolized the unity of the family. The night before the wedding, Catherine stayed at the Goring Hotel in London with her family, while William spent his last night as a bachelor at Clarence House. Both reported being nervous but excited about the ceremony and about beginning their married life together. The morning of April 29th, 2011, dawned bright and clear in London. Catherine woke early and began the lengthy process of getting ready for what would be one of the most watched events in modern history. Her hair and makeup were done by her regular stylists, keeping the look natural and elegant. The wedding dress, which had been kept secret until this moment, was revealed to be a masterpiece of craftsmanship and design. The journey from the Goring Hotel to Westminster Abbey took Catherine and her father through streets lined with hundreds of thousands of well-wishers. The crowds had been gathering since the early hours of the morning, creating a festive atmosphere that surprised Catherine with its warmth and enthusiasm. "I can't believe how many people are here," Catherine said to her father as their car made its way through the cheering crowds. "They're here for you," Michael Middleton replied. "They're celebrating your happiness." At Westminster Abbey, nearly 2,000 guests had gathered to witness the ceremony. The ancient church was filled with the sounds of the Abbey choir and the London Chamber Orchestra, creating an atmosphere of solemn celebration that befitted the historic occasion. William and Harry had arrived earlier and were waiting at the altar when the Abbey doors opened to admit Catherine and her father. The moment when William first saw his bride approaching down the aisle was captured by cameras and broadcast around the world. His face showed a mixture of love, pride, and nervous excitement that made the formal occasion feel deeply personal and intimate. The ceremony itself was conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, with readings chosen by William and Catherine that reflected their personal beliefs and their commitment to service. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but their delivery was heartfelt and personal. When William placed the wedding ring on Catherine's finger, the circle of commitment that had begun with their first meeting at St. Andrews was finally complete. They were no longer just boyfriend and girlfriend, no longer just an engaged couple planning for the future. They were husband and wife, united not just in love, but in purpose. The moment when they emerged from Westminster Abbey as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge was one of pure joy. The crowds outside the Abbey erupted in cheers, and the bells of Westminster rang out across London in celebration. The balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace, where William and Catherine shared their first kiss as a married couple, was watched by an estimated 2 billion people worldwide. The image of them kissing on the balcony, surrounded by their families and looking radiantly happy, became one of the most iconic photographs of the 21st century. "I love you, Mrs. Wales," William whispered to Catherine as they stood on the balcony, using the informal title she would use in private. "I love you too," Catherine replied. And in that moment, all the challenges they had faced and overcome seemed worth it for the joy they were sharing. The reception at Buckingham Palace was an elegant affair that blended royal tradition with personal touches chosen by William and Catherine. They had their first dance to Your Song by Elton John, a choice that honored both their personal taste and Sir Elton's friendship with William's mother. During his speech at the reception, Prince Charles spoke about his joy in welcoming Catherine to the family and his confidence in the contribution she would make to the monarchy and to the country. The Queen, in a rare display of public emotion, was seen wiping away tears during the speeches. As the evening drew to a close and William and Catherine prepared to leave for their honeymoon, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From their chance meeting at St. Andrews to this grand celebration at Buckingham Palace, they had grown together, faced challenges together, and ultimately chosen to commit their lives to each other and to the service of their country. The honeymoon in the Seychelles provided them with their last opportunity for complete privacy as a couple. Soon they would return to London to begin their new life as working members of the royal family, with all the responsibilities and public scrutiny that role would entail. But as they walked hand in hand along a secluded beach in the Indian Ocean, William and Catherine were simply two people in love, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and excited about the future they would build as husband and wife. Their fairy tale had become reality, but more importantly, their love had proven strong enough to survive the transformation from private romance to public institution. The boy who had been born to be king had found the woman who would stand beside him on that journey, and together they were ready to write the next chapter of their story, not as individuals, but as partners united in love, purpose, and service to something greater than themselves. Their love story, which had begun with a simple collision in a university corridor, had evolved into something that would inspire millions around the world and help shape the future of the British monarchy. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been, the story of two people who found each other, chose each other, and committed to building a life together against all odds.